Some people come into your life quietly. No grand entrance, no warning. They just show up. And before you even realize what's happening, they've already changed something in you that you can't quite name. This is a story about two people who had no business falling for each other. A man who built walls the way other people breathe, automatically, without thinking. And a woman who had spent years making herself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Neither of them was looking for anything. That's usually how it starts, isn't it? You stop looking and then, there they are. Sitting across from you, saying something that shouldn't matter, and somehow it's the only thing you'll think about for the rest of the week. If you've ever been in a room with someone and felt the air change, felt that specific kind of tension that has nothing to do with words and everything to do with the space between them, then you already know exactly what kind of story this is. Before we dive in, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and leave us a like. It genuinely helps us keep making stories like this one. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love knowing who's on the other side of the screen. I didn't think much about the job when I applied. That's the honest truth. It was a Tuesday in March. I had $37 in my checking account, and my last position had ended the way most things in my life had ended recently. Quietly, without ceremony, like a door closing in another room. I'd been a senior coordinator at a mid-size marketing firm for 4 years. Good at it too. But when the company restructured, my name was on the wrong list, and that was that. No argument, no negotiation. I packed my things into a cardboard box and carried it to my car in the rain, and the only thing I felt was tired. Not devastated, just tired. That probably said more about where I was emotionally than I wanted to admit at the time. My best friend Camille said I needed something that would challenge me. My mother said I needed to move back to Portland. I applied to 14 jobs in 2 weeks and tried not to think about Gregory, which worked about 40% of the time. Gregory and I had ended 7 months before the layoff. 2 years together, and when it was over, I couldn't point to one single dramatic moment. It had been a slow erosion, the kind where you don't notice how much of yourself you've given away until one day you go to say something and realize you've forgotten how your own opinion sounds out loud. The position at Ives & Co. came through a recruiter, executive assistant to the principal architect. The salary was serious. The job description was lean, almost terse, which I would later understand was very on brand. I did my research. Finnick Ives was 34, co-founder, industry reputation somewhere between visionary and difficult. The firm designed sustainable architecture that had been featured in 3 international publications in the last 2 years alone. I didn't find much about him personally. One photo, taken at a conference before the accident, someone mentioned in a forum thread I probably shouldn't have gone down. I didn't look further. Monday morning, I showed up 8 minutes early, which is my version of on time. The receptionist, a calm woman named Priya, walked me to the top floor without much conversation. The office was all glass and raw concrete and natural light. It smelled like coffee and something woodsy I couldn't place. And then Priya stopped at a half-open door and said, "He's ready." I walked in. Finnick Ives was behind a desk the size of a small country, reviewing something on a screen, and he didn't look up immediately. When he did, his eyes were darker than I expected, steadier. He looked at me the way people look at a blueprint, like he was trying to find the flaw before committing to anything. "Lyra Jensen," he said, not a question. "That's me," I said. He nodded once, slowly, and said, "Sit down. Let's see if this is worth either of our time." I sat down, and for the first time in months, I felt something sharpen inside me that I hadn't realized had gone dull. The first week, I told myself it was just a job. I told myself that every morning on the drive in, usually while finishing the last of my coffee at a red light 2 blocks from the office. It was a good job, a serious job, the kind that required all of me to show up, which was exactly what I needed. Finnick was demanding, in a way that felt almost impersonal at first. Precise, fast, intolerant of vagueness. He communicated in short sentences and expected things done before he finished explaining them. Most people would have found that exhausting. I found it, strangely, like a relief. There was no room to overthink, no space for the quiet, creeping anxiety that had followed me around for most of the past year. He needed something, I did it, and the work moved forward. Simple. Except nothing about Finnick Ives was actually simple. I noticed things, even when I didn't want to. The way he held his jaw tight when a meeting ran long, the way he never asked for help with anything physical, unless the alternative was impossible. The way the entire office adjusted its atmosphere around his mood, without anyone acknowledging that was what they were doing. And I noticed the way he watched me sometimes. Not obviously, not inappropriately, but with that same quiet assessment from the first day, like I was still a blueprint he hadn't fully figured out. By Thursday of my first week, I had reorganized his filing system, flagged 3 contractual inconsistencies in a vendor agreement, and declined a call from a journalist on his behalf with enough authority that the man actually apologized before hanging up. Friday afternoon, Finnick called me into his office, and I thought, for one honest second, that I was about to be corrected on something. Instead, he said, "The vendor thing, how did you catch that?" I told him I'd worked with a similar contract structure before, and something felt off in the language. He was quiet for a moment. "Good instincts," he said. That was it. No smile, no softening. But I walked back to my desk aware that something had shifted, even if only slightly. The following Monday was when things got more complicated. His 11 o'clock ran over, and I brought coffee into the conference room without being asked because I could hear through the glass that the tone had changed and Finnick's voice had dropped to the register it dropped to when he was close to ending a conversation permanently. I set the cups down, caught his eye briefly, and left. The meeting ended 10 minutes later with the client still on board. When everyone had gone, Finnick came to stand near my desk, not hovering, just present, and said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said without looking up. He didn't move for a moment. Then, quietly, almost to himself, "Most people would have waited to be asked." I looked up then. He was already walking back to his office, but he left the door open. He never left the door open. I stared at that open door for a full 10 seconds before I remembered to breathe. 3 weeks in, I understood the unwritten rules of the office. Don't linger near his door when he's on a call. Don't rearrange anything on his desk without telling him first. Don't offer help with physical things unless he asks. And he almost never asks. The staff had learned these rules through trial and error over months. I had figured them out in days, which I think unsettled some of them more than it should have. Priya told me over lunch that the last 3 assistants had lasted an average of 6 months combined. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you mention weather. I told her I wasn't planning on going anywhere. She looked at me with something that wasn't quite skepticism and wasn't quite belief, and said, "We'll see." I didn't take it personally. I was starting to understand that everyone around Finnick had developed a kind of protective detachment. It was easier than getting invested in someone who kept the world at a very specific and deliberate distance. The problem was that I was starting to notice the distance less and the man more. It happened gradually. The way he explained a design concept to a junior architect one afternoon. Patient in a way he never was with clients. Careful with his words in a way that suggested he actually cared whether the kid understood. The way he took his coffee without sugar, but always had the kitchen stocked with it for everyone else. Small things. The kind of things that don't mean anything on their own, but accumulate quietly until one day you realize they've been building into something you didn't plan for. The incident with the deadline happened on a Wednesday. He had set an internal review for a major residential project 2 days earlier than the team expected, and I could see by 10 in the morning that it wasn't going to be ready. Not at the standard he would accept. I pulled the numbers, confirmed what I suspected, and walked into his office. I told him directly. The deadline was going to produce work that didn't reflect what the team was actually capable of, and pushing it would cost more in revisions than the 2 days would save. He looked at me for a long moment. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the old reflex, the one that said I had overstepped, that I should have phrased it differently, softer, safer. Then he said, "You should have led with the numbers." "I did," I said. The first thing I said was the timeline. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, closer to recalibration. "Push it 2 days," he said, and went back to his screen. I turned to leave and he said, without looking up, "Jensen." I stopped. "Good call." I walked out and stood in the hallway for a second with my back against the wall, doing absolutely nothing, which was very unlike me. That evening he stayed late. I stayed too, finishing a report that could have waited until morning. We didn't acknowledge that we were both still there, but at some point I looked up and found him already looking at me. And neither of us said a word about it. The look didn't get mentioned. Of course it didn't. That was the thing about Finnick. He didn't circle back to moments. He moved forward, always forward, and if something happened that didn't fit neatly into the version of himself he was presenting to the world, it simply didn't get addressed. I respected that, in a way. I understood it more than I wanted to admit. The next morning he was sharp and professional, and gave me 3 tasks before I'd finished my first cup of coffee, and I matched his pace without comment. But something had changed in the texture of the silence between us. It was still quiet. It just wasn't empty anymore. Dana Reyes, his co-founder, came in that Thursday for their monthly review. She was warm in the way that people who are very good at reading rooms are warm. Calibrated, genuine enough, but always slightly aware of the effect. She shook my hand with both of hers and said she'd heard good things. And I noticed Finnick, just slightly, go still beside her. After the meeting, Dana stopped by my desk alone. She asked how I was settling in, whether I needed anything, whether Finnick was being, and she paused here with a small smile, reasonable. I told her he was direct, which was what I preferred. She studied me for a second. "You're the first one who's said that," she said, and then she left. And I spent the rest of the afternoon wondering what exactly she had meant by it. The first real crack came on Friday afternoon. A client called in a fury, a miscommunication about material costs on a commercial project. The kind of thing that happens when 2 people are both certain they said something clearly. Finnick handled the call himself, which was unusual. I could hear his voice from my desk, controlled but tight. And when he came out afterward, he was quiet, in a way that had a different quality than his regular quiet. He sat at the long table in the open area, not his desk, which told me something, and spread out the project file manually, going through it page by page. I brought him water without a word, and sat down across from him, not because he asked, but because the file was large and 2 sets of eyes would move faster. He looked up. I said, "Where does the discrepancy start?" He held my gaze for a moment, and then without a word, he turned the file so I could see it from my side. We worked through it for 40 minutes. Our hands crossed twice over the same page, and neither of us acknowledged it. But I felt the warmth of his fingers near mine both times, like a small shift in room temperature. We found the error. He fixed it. He closed the file and sat back and rubbed the back of his neck. And for just a second, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the work. "Thank you," he said. Quiet, direct, no performance in it. I nodded and gathered my things, and I was almost at my desk when he said, so low I almost missed it, "You didn't have to stay." I turned just enough to answer. "I know," I said. The same words as before, but this time, something in his expression shifted in a way that stayed with me the entire weekend. The weekend did what weekends do when you're trying not to think about something. It made the thinking worse. I went to Camille's on Saturday, and she made pasta and asked too many questions about the new job, and I answered most of them honestly, except for the parts that didn't have clean answers yet. She noticed, because Camille always notices. She didn't push. She just refilled my glass and changed the subject, which is one of the reasons I've kept her around for 12 years. Sunday, I cleaned my apartment, went for a run, and sat on my couch for an hour doing nothing, which is something I never used to do before Gregory, and now do more than I'd like. The therapist I saw briefly after the breakup called it decompression. I called it not being ready to be a person yet. Monday morning, I walked into the office, and Finnick was already there, which was normal, and he looked up when I came in, which was also normal. What wasn't normal was that he said good morning before I did. It was small. Probably nothing. I told myself it was nothing for most of the morning. The week moved the way weeks at Ives & Co. moved. Fast, dense, purposeful. There was a presentation for a city planning committee on Wednesday that required 2 days of preparation, and Finnick and I spent most of Tuesday going over it together in the conference room. I had started to map his working style well enough to anticipate what he'd want before he said it, and he had started to let me, which felt like its own kind of intimacy that I tried not to examine too closely. During a break, he was reviewing something on his tablet, and I was standing at the window with my coffee, looking out at the Seattle skyline, when he said without preamble, "How long were you at the marketing firm?" I turned. He wasn't looking at me, still focused on the screen. 4 years, I said. "Why'd you leave?" I considered the sanitized version. I gave him the real one instead. Restructuring. I was good at the job, but I wasn't essential to the new direction. He was quiet for a moment. "Their loss," he said, still not looking up. It was the most casual thing he'd ever said to me. It landed harder than it should have. Thursday was when the tension shifted into something I could no longer file away under professional. He needed a document from the archive room, a narrow space at the back of the floor lined with flat files and rolled blueprints. I retrieved what he asked for, and when I turned to hand it to him, he was closer than I expected, having come in behind me. The space was small. He reached for the file, and his hand closed over mine for just a second, before he registered the overlap and adjusted his grip. Neither of us moved immediately. The file stayed suspended between us for a beat that lasted longer than it should have. "Sorry," he said. Low, not quite steady. "It's fine," I said, but my voice came out quieter than I intended. He took the file and left without another word. I stood in that narrow room for a moment afterward, my hands still warm where his had been, wondering when exactly I had stopped being careful. I didn't tell Camille about the archive room. Some things lose their shape when you put them into words too soon, and that moment was still doing something inside me that I wasn't ready to interrupt. I filed it away and went back to work, and was professional and efficient and fine for the rest of Thursday and all of Friday morning. And then Friday afternoon, everything shifted again. Finnick had a site visit cancel last minute, which left a 2-hour block in his schedule that he hadn't planned for. I expected him to fill it immediately, a call, a review session, something. Instead, after about 20 minutes, he appeared at the edge of the open area with a rolled blueprint under his arm and said, without quite looking at me, "Come look at something." It wasn't a question. I followed him to the long drafting table near the windows, the one that got the best afternoon light. He unrolled the blueprint and weighted the corners, and I could see immediately that it was different from the commercial projects I'd been filing. The lines were more deliberate, the proportions unusual. It was a residential structure, but the way the spaces connected felt almost narrative, like the building was telling a story about movement and stillness at the same time. "This is the Harlow project," he said. "Private residence, 18 months out." I studied it. The main living space was entirely open to the south, but the private rooms were tucked and angled in a way that felt protected without feeling closed. "The orientation is off from the site plan," I said. He looked at me sideways. "On purpose," he said. "The client wanted light in the morning. I gave them light, but not the obvious kind." I looked at the design again and understood what he meant. The light would enter indirectly, diffused, the kind that fills a room without announcing itself. It was quietly brilliant, and I said so. And something in his posture changed, the way it changed when he wasn't expecting directness. We stood there for a while, longer than the blueprint required. At some point, we were both leaning over the table, and the distance between us had narrowed without either of us deciding that. I could feel the warmth coming off him. I was aware of his hands on the table, the steadiness of them, and I was aware of my own breathing in a way that meant I was trying to control it. He said, "You have good spatial instincts." I said, "I had a good teacher at the firm. She made me think about how people actually move through spaces." He turned his head slightly, just enough that I could see his profile. "That's what most architects miss," he said. "They design for photographs, not for people." I turned to look at him at the same moment he turned to look at me, and we were close. Closer than the archive room, closer than any moment before, and neither of us stepped back. His eyes dropped, just briefly, just once, before coming back to mine. The afternoon light was doing something generous to the room, and I was acutely, almost painfully aware of how much I wanted him to close the remaining distance. He didn't. But his hand, resting on the table, moved an inch toward mine. Just 1 inch. And then his phone rang, and the moment broke cleanly in half, and he answered it and walked toward his office. And I stood at that drafting table alone, with my heart doing something completely inconvenient in my chest, realizing that an inch, in the right moment, can feel like everything. That's a wrap on part 1 of this story. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, things are about to get a lot more interesting. If you enjoyed this, drop a number from 1 to 10 in the comments and let us know what you thought. Your feedback genuinely shapes what we create next. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in part 2.